Good morning, everyone. My name is Crystal Lee Olson, and I'd like to thank you for joining the Cornerstone International Group, Cornerstone Toronto team this morning for the COVID 7-step model to success tools and strategies. We recognize that leaders are looking for solutions and framework to open organizations under new guidelines, and our intention today is to give you some strategies and framework to consider that's going to help you set up organizations for success, and this will allow you to protect employees, serve customers, drive growth, and mitigate a second wave. So at the end of the presentation, we have a bit of a thank you offer for you spending time with us today. And I can see that quite a few of you are from all across the globe. So we really appreciate you in whichever time zone that you're in taking the time to join us today. So please note that this session is going to be recorded for future resources. So everyone is in listen mode only. So if you have any questions, please send them through the Q&A, which is located in your Zoom toolbar. And you also have the ability to upvote any questions so that if you see a question that you'd like to see answered, just simply click it by signaling the thumbs up button. And we will have time for a Q&A at the end of the presentation. So any questions can be sent throughout the session and we'll address at the end with our panel. So today, our presenter is Sandra Cabral, an HR professional, and we also have two other panelists on hand today with us that will be available for the Q&A at the end. So we have Melissa Jones, an HR professional, and Alexander Lechkin, the CEO of the Cornerstone Toronto Group. And so without further ado, I will pass this off to Sandra.
Thank you, Crystal Lee, for that introduction, and I'm very pleased to be able to present the integration process on behalf of our team. We're really going to talk today, like Crystal Lee suggested, it's a framework. It's a leadership framework to help businesses navigate and manage through this and out of this pandemic position that we find ourselves in. It is for leadership. This really coming back to business is going to be dependent on how leaders can come to the table, how they can take a different approach and really acknowledge, support, and appreciate their workforce. These are certainly times of change, and leaders are not aware of all the special circumstances that have taken place with all of their employees and how best to motivate them and regroup them back to business. So the framework itself, it's called PROACTS to help you remember: protection, recovery, opportunity, analysis, communication, transformation, and sustainability. And this is a framework that really is based on protection. It is really the cornerstone of the entire model. Without the protection pieces in place, it's really difficult for businesses to move forward. So we will spend a little bit of extra time on this particular phase of the integration process. We're starting with really employee protection procedures and measures, workplace design, supply chain and access rules. But it's not just about the employees' protection. It's not just about where we put our chairs or the signs that are visible. We have to understand that the measures that we're putting in place are for our families, our work families, our families' families, the subcontractors, their families. It's really community efforts. So the more effort we put into this phase, the more encouragement and respect we put into this phase, the more we're going to have success in making our employees feel like we've really given them this opportunity to make them feel secure and to put things in place to be able to move forward. So specifically on the protection model, we look to, if we could have the next slide, please, Crystal Lee. We look to really workforce return plans. So many options are available to employers, but things to consider would be staggered shifts, team configurations. For example, a team configuration would help to the extent that if one team member was to become symptomatic with COVID and the entire team needed to be self-isolating, that you still have teams backing up. Your business still continues to move forward, and it gives your team members a sense of security. The self-check, how do you train employees to make sure that they're doing self-check procedures at home, and then the on-site screening as well. That's an employer responsibility, and that really highlights the employee's commitment to keeping the employees safe right from the moment that they arrive at work. We're looking at PPE protocols. Providing employees with personal protective equipment is not enough. We really need to be able to provide them with instructions and rules when they should be wearing them, where they should be required. Visible physical distancing indicators in the office, washrooms, meeting rooms, and corridors. But it extends even to the lobbies and the parking lots. How do we convey to employees that it is their obligation to participate if we are not taking the leadership role? So following the new ways of working, it's really a collective move forward for the business. And again, leadership is going to make that significant statement by putting the effort into this very first stage of the process. Moving on to the next stage, we have recovery. And really, this is starting to be an exciting stage for employers. We've provided safety, we've made our employees feel secure in the protection phase of the process, and now we're moving to business is open. We need to reaffirm the strategies that were put in place, strategies designed to move the business forward from where we are. We can't go back. We can't say, you know, this last 3 months did not happen. We have to, therefore, give confidence to our employees in this recovery phase. Human resource policies can, you know, sometimes be perceived as a little rigid. We're knowing now that in this recovery stage that there has to be flexibility, that we have to have policies, programs, and procedures that can adapt, just like the business needs to adapt. But we want to be welcoming people. You know, we are open, we are set to move forward, and the company and the employees are working together to make sure that happens. Designing a supportive culture so that people are coming back to a positive environment. Certainly, while we've had struggles through this process, we've also had successes through this process, and we're going to help to build on those. The wellness programs are going to be key. I know in my career as an HR professional, there has been always a focus on health and safety, and those are great areas to focus on at work, of course. Wellness is seen more of, you know, more of a cost burden, and whenever there was cuts, whenever there was something to remove from that, you know, pyramid of care, it was the wellness program. This needs to be much more robust now. We need to really let employees know that their overall wellness is important. And how their well-being will be, not just their well-being, but we consider the impact of what's been going on in their lives prior to coming back to work, prior to this stage. And then educating our workforce. It's going to be, there's going to be a lot of sensitive discussions around, you know, ensuring that employees know how to behave at work under these new circumstances. It's not just about being a polite how you sneeze. How you sneeze will have a great impact on your coworkers around you now. So how do we educate people without being offensive and make sure that we still are coming together as a team? So perhaps protection and recovery aside, these two are really critical in laying the foundation for the business to be able to move into the next phase of opportunity. But I'm going to just pause here and look for comments from either Melissa, Al, or Crystal Lee in terms of the first two phases that we've covered.
Thanks very much, Sandra. I think you did a great job of articulating what's happening here in Canada, in Toronto, when it's come to the importance of looking to employees, looking to make sure that we're employee-facing. And as leaders in organizations, it's critical that they're understanding and listening to what the employees are telling us. And that is that they want to be protected, they want to feel safe in their workspace. And then also that there is a fear that exists. And I'm sure across the world, all of the other attendees that have joined today, their businesses are looking and saying, okay, how do we recover? And I think this is a really critical piece, making sure we have effective policies, making sure that we are listening to our employees, and then also reaffirming that we do have strategies as leaders to move our business forward. So whatever your business landscape might look like, how are we putting in place those strategies, and what are those strategies, and working with employees to make sure that we recover from this? So I think you did a great job of articulating those first two phases. Thanks, Sandra.
My pleasure.
Yeah, I would just add to that, Melissa, that certainly the two phases, protection and recovery, are mission critical to have a sustainable business. And that's the key piece. It's not good enough just to be able to launch or reopen and, okay, fine, everybody's really on on point and on discipline for the first 60 days, and then we start to slip back. We cannot move towards a slip back or a second stage surge, because that'll be probably worse than the first stage. So we believe that having good, strong processes and protocols that are well thought out, as Melissa and Sandra said, with engagement with employees, this is a two-way street, to ensure that everybody is practicing, top-notch protection all the way through every day of the week that they're in. And some of the pieces that we didn't cover in the protection piece, because every company is a little bit different with their comfort levels, but certainly thermal temperature checks is a potential procedure. Sandra talked about the self-checking. I happen to believe that I call them wellness checks are important, that HR can do when employees are coming back into the system. To just call out, it's a care call. How are you doing? Have you been sick? Have you been traveling? How's your family doing? Has anybody been ill in your family? Just so you have an idea as to what's going on. The other piece to that is that, and Sandra mentioned the HR policies, they're going to have to be more robust and tied into the current situation. Like, for example, when somebody's going on a holiday, typically you wouldn't report in HR where you've gone. But now, probably HR is going to want to know, have you been out of the province or out of your state or out of your country if you're coming back in, because there may have to be some isolation procedures put in place. So that's typically something you wouldn't ask. We had a very unique situation in Canada, in a province called New Brunswick on the east coast of the country, where a doctor at a hospital actually went and visited some people in a neighboring province, Quebec, didn't self-isolate when they came back, which they should have. It was in procedure, but obviously there was a breakdown somewhere, and had contact with over 100 people, and that really threw the hospital off. So those kinds of things we have to be really cognizant of, and run a very tight HR ship on these kinds of pieces.
Yeah, I would agree that supports all of the leadership research out there on employee engagement, and that foundation, one of the key foundations, is creating psychological safety.
Exactly. Thank you
Definitely.
very much. Yeah, that's very true. People are very complex, and that's why, when we're trying to recover from such a challenging event, it's important to have a guide, some thought-provoking discoveries on how we can best do that. Having said that, we've had some focus on the protection and recovery side, but now we move to opportunity. Again, each phase is critical, but it's moving forward here. And on the recovery stage, we have really the opportunity to say, this is our short and long-term goals. Crystal Lee, if I could just ask if you could move the slide forward, please. Thank you. So this is our focus on leadership, our managers, our supervisors, our team leaders, and coaching for success in this new environment. And this is probably the first of a few times that we're going to talk a little bit about management, compassionate management. We have to think in the opportunity stage, and really coming back to work is how we need to lead differently, how we need to coach differently in this type of environment. A less autocratic way of doing things to make sure that companies, or the employees of the companies, feel like they're part of an event, of a family, so that they want to come back to work. I'm not sure, across the globe what the experiences have been, but I know here in Canada, some of our challenges have been just having employees feel comfortable to come back to work, like there's going to be an ongoing business, and how will they be treated, and how will they overcome these sensitivities and these difficult conversations. That's why it's key for the leadership alignment. You really need to ensure for the employees that they have a sense of change, that the leadership is in charge, that they have a new way of managing the employee workforce in terms of getting people collectively moving in the right and same direction. And then we have to look at, this was an opportunity to learn. It's an event. We don't want to repeat this event. We didn't plan for this event, but what did we learn? How can we survive if it does happen again, or something similar happens again? Leaving the supply chain in a more secure state. opportunities for revenue growth outside of perhaps our typical product offering. What efficiencies did we learn? What were we doing that we really didn't need to do? That could save resources, that could help us, in a challenging time where the margins are lower and we're looking and searching for opportunities to stay sustainable. Customer service and really involving all of the stakeholders, all of the relationships and strategies with customers and everybody involved in the business. It's an opportunity to really look at each and every one of those sections and opportunities as a company. To do that, you have to analyze. You have to really take the opportunity to analyze where we are, and that moves us to phase 4. These two are really linked together. It is, unfortunately, a possibility that there could be a second wave. I know there is lots of conversation about it. But as we look at opportunity and we start to analyze some of the things in that stage, it moves us into, the workforce analysis portion of things and how we can sort of hone in on that. The workforce design often has been about these are the jobs we've always had, especially in unionized environments, very structured, very established or mature organizations. Well, we can see perhaps those things might need to change. Are they the same jobs coming back, or are they different jobs? Are they combinations? How do we reorganize? Looking at critical jobs, a lot of effort around critical jobs versus critical activities left organizations scrambling. So we need to make sure that when we talk about transfers of skills and knowledge, that we're not just saying we're going to train people in each other's job to make our business safe and secure. We need to look at specific activities. What are the activities of those jobs? And focus on those things. Those are the gaps that we saw when our businesses came to a halt. And how do we look for the future in terms of workforce planning? Our employees will be looking at us. What do we do in this stage? Do we use the COVID-19 as a restructuring tool, or do we do real workforce planning and look at what skills are we missing? Do we need to do some recruitment? Do we need to make some difficult decisions with regard to layoffs and terminations for the security and the sustainability of the business? Employees will be responsive.
And that is
the right approach. Sorry, Melissa.
Oh, sorry. I think we had a bit of a disconnect, Sandra, maybe with I was just going to say that is one of the things with organizations that we work across North America with, that they are looking now at their workforce and who they need to be sort of bringing back, because they have unfortunately had to do layoffs and terminations, but also how they're looking at their recruitment model going forward. And that's been really important for us to work with leaders of organizations to say, what does that recruitment look like? What does the model look like for organizations? And how are we helping you to understand exactly as you said, Sandra, sort of what are some of those critical activities? That's the piece that we've really been focusing on. And it has been almost a reset for some organizations that we've been working with to understand what some of those activities are.
Absolutely.
Well, and just to further this, we had a question come in about who's responsible, like a concern about who's responsible in the organization to follow up, and acknowledging that this is a large responsibility now to kind of keep tabs on everyone, right? And so HR teams typically are too small to be effective. So the question more at the end was, so you touched on kind of how to identify key players within the organization, but between Sandra and Melissa, maybe Al, you want to chime in on this, but what do you feel the training would look like?
Well, I wouldn't say keeping tabs on people. I think that HR has always been, I don't know what it's across the world. I mean, it's a little bit different here, but now we've really moved human resources into being a business partner, to being about strategic growth, about recruitment and growing organizations. And I would turn it into that we're not wanting to see what you're doing and how are people working from home and are you doing your job and it's about how can we support you? How can we engage you? How can we as people in the organization. So, I mean, to your question, Crystal, of who's responsible, it's an entire leadership and managerial responsibility. And I think it's really important for people to look at that. And as an HR team, as a leadership team, how are you training your managers? And that's one of the things that Sandra's touching on. We cut out a little bit, Sandra, but you were talking about managing a dispersed workforce. So, we have teams that they have a social hour on Friday afternoon, or they just want to touch base and still have those one-on-one conversations with the team that they're managing, which I encourage. I say still, we should be doing that as if we were still in the workplace. You're still giving feedback, giving constructive feedback, ensuring that you're letting your employees know what is expected of them. What do we need to see this week? What are some deliverables that we have? What are the outcomes that we need? So to answer the question about responsibility, it is from the top down. It should be from your CEO, president of the company. What are those strategic objectives? To your management team, to your individual managers, and your employees. That accountability, how are we ensuring that they feel accountable and they feel that they can contribute? The success of the organization is only as strong as every single player in the organization. So I think that it's a great question, but we really need to empower our staff and our leaders to say, we are all responsible for making sure that we're being held accountable. And it's not just HR saying, you're doing this, you're doing that, are you doing this? It's how are we as a collective managerial team making sure we're being accountable?
Yeah, and that makes total sense. I guess the term keeping tabs is, so I think some of the question might have been driven on the comment about what Al was saying in regards to protection of, following up with all the employees that have traveled and who's sick and who's well and doing wellness checks. And, a lot of, I think, fear and anxiety comes from within organizations and leaders, especially in HR, is that they already had we work in an environment where we're already overwhelmed and overtaxed as employees. So now we're coming into this new COVID environment. We're presenting this material today and saying, okay, so on top of your job already, now you've also got this, and these check marks to do, right?
Yeah.
So I'm curious to know from the team, what sort of training or facilitation can we offer as professionals to help support those people that are champions, managers, leaders, supervisors, CEOs, to help foster and nurture that culture?
I think you're muted, Al.
Yeah, sorry, I'll just jump in for a quick second on that. So that's an interesting question that Laurie O'Donnell posed, our partner in Vancouver. I think it's going to mean a cultural shift in many respects for a lot of organizations. And that's kind of where, our teams come in place across the globe, is to work with companies to understand how that cultural shift should take. Managing with compassion isn't something that's kind of been in our language. Some companies have been doing it, some haven't. But now, with living in this COVID environment, managing with compassion is going to have to be a very key piece. And so that is something that, managers and leaders will have to be very, very sensitive on as we go forward. I mean, we're probably in this environment for possibly another year until a vaccine comes out. So the companies have to continue to thrive and rebuild in this state. Sandra?
Yes, thank you, Al. And actually, we are going to talk a little bit about that, and I can do that right now in the communication as the sustainability phase, where we recognize with leadership that there is going to be a sort of a higher level burden in terms of the extension of what they'll need to do from an employee perspective. So ideas that have come to us have been, and I think Crystal Lee mentioned, the idea of champions. Let's look at extending and being creative with some support for the leadership. Is it possible in your organization to develop peer groups or mentors, that's champions that specialize in certain aspects of what we're going through? So do we have, a small team of people making sure that the protection implementation strategies remain in place and are not short term, and that things continue? Things can be put in place with your employees at various levels within your organization to support leadership, as well as leadership supporting the employees themselves. And communication really underpins. It's the foundation of everything. You'll see at the end that the framework is actually in vertical pillars, but communication is throughout every process. And that communication plan, it ties to, how we manage each and every other phase. An agile communication plan that can adapt and just, really be able to say, okay, we're doing this right, it's working, we're not doing this right, let's try something else. Make sure it's effective, the messages are effective, and the platforms make sense for your organization. As I was saying, it's not going to be the same for every company, but you need to make sure what you do put in place is working. And the leadership communication and promoting a giving and receiving channel of feedback is going to be key. We cannot take the approach as leaders that we are going to let you know what's happening. We need to be inclusive without overburdening. So giving information to our employee groups, providing, for example, maybe an FAQ that is updated on a timely basis that employees can expect updates on. So, it's not a constant distraction from actually working, but that they can expect that as new information or new policies develop, they can expect to receive information about them. Talking about the impact and demystifying fears, I think Melissa mentioned, people are nervous, people are scared. They want to make sure that the leadership has taken enough of steps and modifications and sort of looking at the business differently to make sure that, yes, our strategy is going to work. Am I going to have a job? Checking in with employees informally is going to be key, formally and informally. We talked about perhaps HR giving calls, but managers can give calls, champions can give calls, peer groups can give calls to people who are working remotely, just checking in. How are things going? How are things going with your families? Talking about the fact that now maybe we have a workforce that some people work at home and some people are working on site. Or you're now working with different groups of people that you're not used to because you've been established into specialized teams. So the communication platforms and how you make sure that the employees are involved is super important. Not overburdening them, but involving them. Making sure that their communication is confidential. And we'll just spend 30 seconds on the confidential piece. There's going to be a lot of conversations, very personal conversations that take place between, a manager, a leader, and their employees. And when I've personally had many experiences in HR where the conversations start out with, so I was told this and I was told not to tell anybody, but I'm going to tell you and you're not going to tell anyone. We know this doesn't happen, and taking the leadership role in this level of confidentiality is going to be so important. We cannot tolerate that. We cannot have somebody coming to us saying, I have something to tell you, but you can't tell anyone else. We have to be more transparent than that. And what we learn, there needs to be an established confidential channel to make sure that we're dealing with family sensitivities so that nobody finds out information about other people that isn't told directly by that person themselves. So moving into, coming back to work in this very sensitive time, we really need to make sure we educate our leaders and our employees on the need for that confidential channel of communication. Melissa, did you have a comment?
Yeah, absolutely, Sandra. I think you said that perfectly in terms of the importance of listening to our employees and understanding. And then also I want to just touch on the being equitable and being fair, because we have people that have different circumstances. There are people that are home with small children that here in Canada that are homeschooling, people that are living with elderly parents, people maybe that don't feel comfortable taking public transportation, and that's the only way they can get to work. So how we deal with each employee on a case-by-case basis now has also led to some of those challenges around confidentiality. Oh, but he gets to work from home, but I need to come into the office. Oh, but this person gets this, and this person's maybe getting an allowance for taking some sort of transportation in a car instead of taking public transportation. So all these things that have come out of this, it's about communicating with individuals. It's about, again, the transparency that you pointed out, Sandra, which is really important, and the being fair, right? How are we ensuring that our policies and the way that we're treating employees across the board is equitable is really important during this time as well. And we challenge leaders to think in that vein as well.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Melissa. Those are great comments. And if we're doing some of these things right, which, you know, I'm hoping now, because we've already gone through, you know, 5 phases of our 7-step process, that, you know, we really are getting into a more exciting time, a more exciting phase, and that would be transformation. The efforts put in under protection, recovery, opportunity analysis, and communication really get you here. They get you to the new business landscape where expectations are set. We're providing structure, vision, mission. Has it changed? Do we have a new landscape or the same? We've talked a lot about managing with compassion, but we haven't talked a lot about achieving results. You know, results or outcomes. Actually, I think, Melissa, you may have mentioned that. It's important that as a business we have to, you know, we have to be profitable. We have to move forward. We have to have outcomes. So we're not suggesting with this integration process that, you know, people get a pass not to perform. No, if we set everything, if we set a foundation, we provide that structure, if we manage and we are agile in the way that we respond to people, we certainly need to be expecting results and outcomes. And that's important. If we set up channels, if we set up ways for employees to be successful, we have the right to achieve those results. And then as we move forward through these changes and adjustments, we're going to have to just be, again, agile to be able to just, you know, say, okay, this isn't working. In the transformation stage, we've already sort of attempted some things, we've revised them, we've modified them, and we've adjusted. And we need to be fostering the supportive team culture that I'm sure existed on many levels in many organizations before this. Our managers, they're going to lead their teams back. They're going to be ready. They're going to be looking for creating familiarity. Look at what was really good in terms of your culture, your company culture, your department culture, your business unit culture. Look at what was good. And then think about, you know, 6 or 8 months ago, if you were sitting around a table in a meeting room and you were talking about what you'd like to change about your culture and using this experience to do that. You know, take what was good, build on it, take what wasn't working and try to move it out of the organization itself. Touching individuals, talking to them, making sure that, you know, they've got a presence. And really, when we talk about what can they do, how can we create new things, in the transformation stage, you'll be looking to say, all right, so what can our employees be doing together? How can we bring them together as teams, remote and on site? Well, what about a committee that, you know, well, we won't call it a social committee, but I'm sure we had social committees before. Maybe we look at it as a community committee. What can our employees do now to really reach out into the community? We're not going to organize picnics for 500 people, but what about the people who are really struggling to, you know, eat? And it's, you know, basic shelter, basic food for our community. So if we're lucky enough to be back at work and earning income, having that culturally positive committee or something like that, of course, it's just a suggestion to really give back, will really help your business move to the next level and build on what you're doing. Melissa?
And we've seen that from companies that have really rallied together, and from organizations that we work with here in Canada and across North America. I mean, that's been really encouraging. And I think to see how this transformation has happened and how businesses have taken this as a chance to reset and say, okay, we need to be compassionate to those around us. I had a manager last week that said to me, I've actually gotten to know my team even better when now, you know, somebody's saying, okay, I can't do a call at lunchtime because I have kids and doing that. Okay, and talking about the challenges that they have, and they've actually articulated that they've learned more about their teams during this time. And even though it's over video and we're not face to face, and companies that have created a virtual water cooler where they actually are starting to share more and collaborate more and strategize, and employees that are being more strategic as this time goes on. So I think that's a great point that you made, Sandra, which is about, you know, that supportive team culture is really important during this time.
Yes, absolutely. And it's just the way to sustain your business. It's really to get us to the final stage. Um, Testing the effectiveness of what you've put in place through the first 6 stages, this is the place to do it in the 7th step. Really encouraging those employee groups, those champions, those mentors, doing what's right for your organization. You know, when we put together this integration model, we talked to many people, many businesses. We, you know, used all the resources that we had at hand. And of course, every organization is different. The way you're set up, the type of business you're in. But in the end, people are moving those companies. They're the ones leading the companies. They're the ones doing the work and making the companies sustainable. So evolving to the new ways of working. I've had many people say, you know, I'm already tired of the term, the new normal. You know, it's true. Any kind of phrase that gets overused, maybe we have to think of a new one. I'm not sure, but how about just new ways of working? Just new ways of together being successful. Really finalizing sustainable workplace design protocols. Going back to Al's point, these are not short-term fixes. Integrate these things into your business. And should we experience something similar, or, you know, heaven forbid something comes back to us again where we're in this position, we won't be at the starting point again, because we'll have integrated these things into our operating, day-to-day operating schedules, and making sure that the individual circumstances continue. So I think there was a comment around, and this is where sustainability comes in, is, you know, is that compassionate leadership temporary? Are the protocols temporary? Is this, you know, a happy family that my company is trying to create, is this temporary? No, you're here. You're going to sustain now, because these processes are integrated. They have become part of your organization. We won't go back. I had several experiences when through SARS and H1N1, where things were in place for very short periods of time. Employees were not confident after experiencing that. Now with this model and this integration, they're going to see that you're committed to all of these things that have been put in place. So whether it's you know, a month from now or a year from now, these things are part of your business. That is really going to get you commitment. And when you're thinking about longer term attraction, retention of employees, you know, you want to be the company that people want to come to work for, not the company who decided that none of these things were super important and, you know, lost those skills. The reinvestment required to regain skills, it could be priceless. So you want to make sure that you're doing all you can to say, we have a great workforce, we have the skills we need, we're going to retain those skills, we're going to develop those people, and we're going to make our organization go to the next level. And prioritizing the wellness of employees will make that difference. And then finally, we need to talk about what can we do to celebrate, because through all of these phases, and I'm sure before we even start with these phases, you think about all of the experiences that you had and how some of your employees really rallied, how the creativity came out, how some leaders really took front and center to say, okay, you know, we're really suffering, but what can we do? We've seen on the news the number of leaders, restaurateurs that have been, you know, providing food, and just, you know, their business is suffering, yet they're doing really positive things. If you look in your organization as you've gone through this process, and we'll go through these stages, you really have to celebrate, making sure that the employees know everything that's going really well and everything that you've done together that's going to make sure that they can have a job going forward. And from my perspective, you know, that's how I'll leave it, celebrating milestones. And comments from Crystal Lee, Al, and Melissa?
Yeah, I want to say that was really well articulated, Sandra, especially this, like, sustaining the policies. In part of the studies that I've conducted in leadership development and specifically employee engagement, if you look at Gallup polls over the last 5 to 10 years, disengaged employees is an epidemic. So this model of inclusivity, compassionate leadership, fairness, transparency, more visibility of communication, developing that psychological safety is not only going to help combat and mitigate a second wave and come out of COVID, but it's going to have such a huge impact on employee engagement, which I think is something that has been plaguing organizations for a really long time. And leadership simply hasn't had the opportunity, which is so brilliantly tied into this model, is that it really is an opportunity for leaders to grow and shift these paradigms to re-engage employees and reignite passion and reignite innovation, all of these really exciting things.
Absolutely. And I want to address Robert's question that came through the Q&A as well about some of the issues that our coachees and mentees are bringing to the table and that they're having to work with their staff about. And I mean, absolutely, that's something that our managers, our coaches and our team are talking about some of these things when it comes to individual relationships of our staff. He had said that as well in terms of depression, loneliness. I mean, we have employees that are working from home by themselves in a condo in downtown Toronto where they are very isolated. And that is a new type of training that we're doing as well for individual managers of how are we handling some of those personal challenges that our staff are having to go through that maybe in the past we wouldn't have brought into the workplace. They wouldn't have been maybe as prevalent of an issue. So thank you, Robert, for bringing that question up, because it's important for us to identify that in this sort of, restart that we're looking at right now, we are addressing that there are a lot of insecurities from our staff. And I think training is the biggest, that would be the answer to that question, is training our managers and then allowing them to really understand how difficult some of our staff are facing some of these issues and things like that. And then also we do obviously a huge part of our executive recruitment, and we do a lot of recruitment here in Toronto and recruiting. Now your next question, Robert, about new competencies that are required to survive and grow in the new environment. So maybe I'll let Al answer that question, because I know Robert was asking about we've been talking about this a lot on our team here about some of these competencies that we need to make sure that we're growing and that we're surviving. And Al, I'll turn that over to you for Robert's next question.
Yeah, that's a great question on the competencies, and it's a complicated one. I do believe that there's going to be a shift in competencies, especially with line managers, supervisors, and leaders. I think the competencies are going to be really around people who can communicate well and who are resonant leaders, who can really engage with people. So I think those people skills, those soft skills that we often hear about in executive recruitment, are going to become really, really super important as we move through this new phase that we're in. So I think, HR and leaders are going to have to take a look at, competencies when they're hiring people at the recruitment level. What do we really need to drive our company forward in the next 3 to 5 years? And those are questions that every company is going to have to challenge themselves. I think certainly agility is going to be a big piece. Being nimble, being innovative, and being communicators will be sort of 3 or 4 top competencies that maybe didn't kind of bubble all the way up to the surface, but I think now they're going to be right at the top.
Great point, Al.
And I think one of the other stressors that, aside from the emotional and mental stresses that come out of this situation, if you go back to, like, Melissa, you touched on the logistics earlier, right? So I work with a lot of clients in career transition. Their biggest stress is, if I find a job, how am I going to manage teaching, homeschooling my children when both my wife and I work, and there's no childcare, and there's no day camps, and it's summertime. And so there's this family responsibility as well that is another stressor of not just taking public transit or whatever means to get into the office, but just physically having the demand of a job that requires time. And now you've got this family at home as well to not just provide for monetarily, but physically and mentally.
Yep, definitely. And I think that's part of what we're realizing is that we actually, as a team, our Career Compass Canada Executive Coach Global team, we've been doing webinars over the last 2 months. And one of the modules that one of our colleagues, Michelle, presents is about where work meets home. And I think that's another part of this that we've never really had to experience in the past. We have companies that we've worked with for many years that have really discouraged working from home. They really want their people in the office, and now they've been having to adapt. I mean, we've been training CEOs of companies on best practices for interviewing. I'm sure all of you on the call have faced that as well. Al and I had this conversation last week about how do we engage, right? It's sitting in a room with someone and interviewing them. You want to be smiling at them, looking at them, engaging them, but people are looking down. Maybe they're looking at their computer. Maybe they have their video off. Maybe they don't feel comfortable being in front of video or being on video interviews. But how important it is, because we're trying to attract really good talent. We're hiring some directors and executives right now, and it's even educating leaders on best practices of how we interview. And we're really learning how we can educate and be open and be open. And I know even myself, like I'll be on a call and someone will say, the lighting's not great in the room you're in or your office, or it's okay to say that just so that we can see each other. And let's be really positive with each other and be accepting of it. I mean, it's okay if a kid comes running behind you. We can't control it sometimes. It's okay if you hear some background noise. I think that's part of this new way. And I want to thank Sandra for presenting and showing us all these phases, because I think as we go through this integration, it is all about acceptance. It's about how can we make sure that at each phase and as we go, are we being open with each other? Are we having those conversations? And the communication piece was key, Sandra. So that was really great.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Melissa. Maybe at this time, Crystal Lee, we could show the framework itself. Sort of all together. It's a little difficult to read, but you can see that within the framework there's 56 activities. 56 activities that have so much more complexity than is represented in each of the boxes, really. And it's really what I was mentioning before with regard to like personalizing it for your organization. So you look at all of the things that are represented here in this framework, and then you think about, okay, what does my organization need to do? How can I navigate through this? How can I make sure that I can do all the things within this framework so that in the end we're celebrating those milestones? And that basically wraps up the presentation today. So if you have any further questions or comments, Crystal Lee, I'll send it over to you.
Yeah, just a couple of comments. As she shared with us that this is really insightful, and I completely agree with the comment that this will segregate good leaders from the very good leaders.
Definitely.
And yes, we will be sending out, Al, I believe we'll be sending out the recording and copies of the PowerPoint presentation.
Yes, we will. Everybody's registered, correct?
Great. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to pop those in the Q&A box. And as a thank you for your time today, we'd also like to extend Melissa and Sandra's expertise of reaching out to them and having a more in-depth conversation. If you have a specific organization that you're working with, or some of the ideas and concepts that were discussed today, they would be happy to accept any questions or further outreach from anyone that participated today.
Absolutely. We're all about partnership, and we love that. I just had a call on Friday from somebody that just said, you know, it was a unique situation, and it was how could we handle that? And it was a brainstorm, and it was a great chance to chat and speak with our colleagues, and that's really what we're about, and we actually love that. So feel free to reach out to us anytime if you have questions about anything, if it's specific, if it's general. We're happy to chat. We're happy to be part of the Cornerstone group here in Toronto. We're happy to meet our partners. I know, Ali, you had mentioned I think there was going to be a chance to meet everybody in Prague, which won't be happening this year. So meeting virtually works too. So feel free to reach out.
All right. Well, I don't see any other Q&A questions coming in, but a couple comments have come in to say that this was a really good use of time spent and a great way to start the day or end the day wherever you are in the world doing this. And on behalf of the team, Sandra, you did a great job. Al, Melissa, thank you so much for your insight today. And thank you to all of the attendees for your time. And we hope that you stay safe and healthy. And we really look forward to seeing you.
Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.